We are now live. You can begin.
Thank you. It's 9 a.m. Good morning, everybody. Looks like we have 8 out of 9 of us here, so we definitely have quorum. So we'll get this meeting rolling. And I'm looking for any disclosures of pecuniary interest if you have any. I haven't received any ahead of time, so it looks like nobody has any, which is great. We can move on. We're going to go to item 3, which is an update from the Medical Officer of Health on COVID-19, if he is available. I do see Dr. Ranaday. There you are. But I can't hear you.
Oh no. Okay.
It's that same thing. There we go. That's your shtick.
Yeah. How about now?
Yes,
okay.
You're good.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning. It's a very brief update today since we last have met. There isn't that much that I need to update you on. So I would say we haven't had any cases in the last 24 hours, but of course, since the last time we've spoken, there's been a little bit of a spike in cases. Not unexpected, but we've been able to trace all of the contacts around that, and those folks are all isolating as needed. Our total number to date is about 365. And our total number of recoveries or resolutions is 331. We've had a couple of outbreaks declared in the time since we last spoke. One is in a long-term care facility and one is in a workplace. We're actively monitoring those, but so far have not seen much ongoing transmission from that. And so I'm cautiously optimistic, but we still have to play that out and see how it goes. And then finally, I guess the other thing to remember is that you'll have seen a few school-related cases. And so the important thing around that is because schools involve a large number of contacts, for any one school-related case, we're actually isolating quite a few more people than we would have done in the early days when people weren't really seeing anyone and there was no school and fewer workplaces were open. So every case leads to many more contacts than it used to. That's causing some issues around the province in terms of the ability of some health units to keep up with contact tracing. So far, we've not had any issues with that here because of the volume of cases, right? And then finally, hello? Okay. And then finally, there is this idea that there are some hotspots around the province that are moving away from the stage 3 and into a sort of modified stage 2 where schools are still open, but some things are closed. I believe that there are discussions at the province about making some more explicit criteria around that so that everyone has a little bit more certainty around those decisions and how they're made. I haven't heard more definitively on it, but I'm aware that the conversations are happening to support something like that that would then go into the public domain so that people could say, okay, here's how we would know that we have to be in stage 3 or a modified stage 2. Probably the biggest challenge that people are facing now is that the move to a modified, I mean, we're not facing it because we're still in stage 3, but the move to a modified stage 2 is a little bit confusing because some things that were open in stage 2 are closed and some things are open. And so trying to, once we, if we ever are in that situation where we would need to have a modified restricted situation, just really learning from what these other folks have gone through and then trying to be as clear as we can about what's open and what's not based on the provincial direction. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Do I have any questions from the committee? Councillor Bird?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Ranaday. Good morning. I just have a few questions for you, please. As time goes on, more and more people are asking more questions, and so there's lots of things have come up. So the first one is, in all the reports that you give, both from the city and from the county, but all the reports we see on how many cases, how many deaths, how many recoveries, always the word attached is related. Related cases, related deaths, related. So does that mean you're not really sure if it's COVID-19? Like, why use the word related?
That's a good question, Councillor. I think it's a term that we're just sort of used to using, and I think that the reason behind that is so with cases, it's much easier, right? If you have a positive diagnosis by lab result, and we all believe that that's a valid result, then that's a case. And so those cases are just cases. They're not COVID-related cases. where we tend to use the terminology of related is in the domain of fatalities, and so the analogy that I have for that is sort of what we might say is influenza related deaths, right? And that is a combination of people who died from influenza and people who died with influenza, in whom influenza may have been a contributing factor but may not have been the only factor related to their mortality. So that's a term that we've carried over from influenza to COVID to say if it's a COVID related death, that may, that means that the death certificate lists COVID. It may not have been the only cause of death or the foremost cause of death, but it was a death in someone who was a positive case. So that's why we use the terminology of related, and that's kind of where it comes from. It comes from how we address some of the other diseases, but it's usually not used with reference to a case and more used with reference to the consequences of the disease, whether or not it was a fatal case or not.
So would that have anything to do with the articles I've read about, haven't got it in front of me, but I remember something along the lines that if somebody has a COVID-19 test and it's negative, and in that same month they happen to die, whether it's from a road accident or whatever, but if it's in the same month, it's been listed as a COVID death, would that explanation you've just given, because they've had a test, even though it was negative, is that why you're using related deaths?
No, if they had a test and it was negative, it would not have been deemed to be a related death. So the real issue is when the test is positive, but you're not necessarily sure that COVID was the primary cause of death. So
okay.
Yeah, that's where we tend to see related use.
Okay. Next question is, as written and as discussed with you earlier this year, when you and I had a chat. And we talked about COVID-19 not being a virus and that it's a disease resulting from SARS-CoV-2. So if that's the case, why has it taken 17 years to appear since SARS was discovered, I think, back in 2003?
So yeah, I don't want you to conflate or put those two things together, right? SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. It's a name that's given to a constellation of symptoms, right? It's also been applied to this particular virus as well as it has been applied to that original virus, SARS-CoV-1. So it's a naming convention rather than a connection between the two diseases. They're connected by the fact that they're both caused by a coronavirus, but the coronavirus is different in each case.
Okay, the next one is, you also told me about that COVID-19 hadn't been isolated, but SARS-CoV-2 had. So are the tests that you're currently carrying out for SARS-CoV-2 are not COVID-19? And what vaccines when vaccines usually take a minimum of 7 to 8 years to develop, what exactly is being produced in just a matter of months? If you could clarify that, it would be great, please.
I will try, but I'm not intimately involved with the vaccine development world, right? But I can try. So for most purposes, right, when people are using SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, they're using them interchangeably. So in some ways, it's helpful to not think of them as two separate things. Like for our purposes, they're basically the same thing. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. COVID-19 is the name of the set of symptoms that are caused by the virus. But most people talk about them as being interchangeable, right? So when we're talking about vaccine development for the virus has been isolated, and it was the isolation of the virus that enabled the genomic sequencing, as well as the efforts to find a vaccine that targets a particular part of the virus. So in terms of what's being developed for a virus, right? So taking you all the way back to SARS and MERS. MERS is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is also caused by coronavirus, right? After SARS and after MERS, there were ongoing efforts to develop vaccines. I think those efforts sort of plateaued because the disease naturally tailed off and there weren't going to be that many more cases, which meant that there wouldn't be that much of a market, right? When COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 emerged and was, becoming a global phenomenon, I think those companies that had started that research picked it back up again. but we have never actually had a vaccine developed for a coronavirus, which is a type of virus. We've had vaccines developed for other kinds of viruses, but so far not for coronavirus. So when they're talking about vaccine development, they go back to the things that they learned from trying to develop a vaccine to SARS and MERS. They go back to other principles that they've learned from developing vaccines to other viruses, such as Ebola. And they also have been engaging new and sort of innovative technological platforms to try to develop a vaccine that works in different ways. So it's all those three streams of thinking coming together in different industrial complexes trying to build a vaccine for this disease. So there are hundreds of vaccine candidates that are currently in development at various phases, but it remains to be seen at this point which of them will work, right? There are about 9 in clinical trials right now, and so we have to see how those unfold.
Okay, and could you please explain or clarify what is meant by universal influenza?
So universal is a term applied not to influenza, but to the influenza immunization program. So the implication is that it's a universal program that most or almost all people in the community are eligible for the influenza immunization. So it's not related to influenza, it's related to the program.
Okay, and just a last quick question, please. How long do you think people can carry on breathing recirculated carbon dioxide before detrimental effects occur to their well-being? That concerns many people.
So I don't have an exact answer to that question. It really depends on the person, but if the question is in relationship to the idea that masks are just recirculated breathing of air, that we haven't really seen a lot of negative consequences of mask use in terms of detrimental breathing. There are some small indications for when it might not be indicated for somebody in particular circumstances, but other than that, really, we've not seen many harmful effects. So if the question is sort of indirectly related to masks, then there's no real evidence that that's true or that there's a harmful component there. If the question is related to just sort of the general breathing of recirculated air, I would say that in most normal settings where air is recirculated, that the breathing level is not really an issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Warden Weber.
Yeah, through the chair to Dr. Renedy, I just want to give a shout out to the mapping, the regional mapping that I took a tremendous amount of work on you and your team to put this together. And the information on it is very interesting, but I think we have to continue to remind the public that, and it's highlighted on the map, that the case map does not indicate where cases were exposed to COVID-19 and cannot be used to draw conclusions about personal risk. I think that's very important. I know I have had it said to me already from a resident in rural 2, which currently has no cases. We're good. We don't have to do what things look great. So glad to be here. I'm not going to Urban 1 because they have cases, and I think that's a false sense of security. So while the map is interesting, I think we have to be cautious how it gets used and what people perceive from that, and we still continue reminding everybody that it's out there and it's every place. But thank you for all the work that you and your team have did put this together for us.
Thank you, and I did forget to mention that in my update, but it is available online. And one of the other things too is that if people are wondering where they fit, because the boundary lines in the rural areas are exactly by municipality, and in the urban area, the municipalities have been subdivided. So if people are wondering where they fit, there's a little tool at the bottom where you can enter in your address. It'll give you a dissemination area. You go back and put the dissemination area in, and it'll tell you what zone that address is in. So because when you would, we're going to try to expand the map so that people can see it better. But even if we do that, it'll be a little bit confusing because the dissemination areas don't go cleanly by here's a road and above it is this and below it is that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any questions from any other committee members at this time? I know I have one in relation to Thanksgiving weekend. Have we seen any concerns yet as it relates to family gatherings at Thanksgiving?
So good question. So far, no. All of our cases so far that we got in that little spike had exposures that we deemed to have been before the Thanksgiving weekend. And so what we would be looking for is sort of this period just about now for exposures that might have happened in Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. It looks like that's it for our update. Thank you, Dr. Renaday, and again to your staff and to everybody involved. Our sincerest appreciation. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and keep on. We've got a long way to go, so much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to infrastructure and development services. We have one information report regarding 2020 roads and bridges construction. May I have a motion to receive that, please? Councillor Veen, Councillor Miller seconds that. Any discussion? Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff. I'm not sure if I've got all the details on this, but thank you very much for the report on all the ongoing projects, new projects. I think Highway 21, is Jason on here?
Yes.
Okay. Is Highway 21 part of your coverage, right? It's a county road, right?
No, it's a provincial highway, so we don't have anything to do with that highway's maintenance or capital construction.
Okay, so when I get calls from residents that live in that area, should I be asking them to call the Ministry of Transport if they're not getting the answers that they want?
Yeah, absolutely. The Ministry of Transportation has put out advertisements for their contacts and things like that. I can pass that contact on to you directly if you want to share that with them.
Please, yeah.
Or you're welcome to send them to my address and I can give that to them directly.
Yeah, no, if you could send it to me, it'd be great. And then I've got that information. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions on this report? Definitely a lot of work, and it's always fascinating to me to see it itemized like this and to see where we're at. I guess the only question I have for you, Mr. Cole, is Lakeshore Road, the only one within my jurisdiction. So what's the timeline on that at this point? It says November, but is that accurate at this point?
Yeah, I'm gonna, maybe if Matt DeLine is still on and able to speak to that, he might be able to speak to it more directly.
Yeah, I am, if you can hear me.
Yes.
Lakeshore Road, yeah, it's a little bit behind schedule, but there is plans to have it paved and open in November, probably towards the end of November.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll call the question to receive this report. All in favor? That is passed. All right, we do have two reports requiring a motion. I will take them separately. Looking for a motion on the intersection studies, County Roads 14 and 26 and 22-979 report. So a motion, yes, Deputy Ward Marriott, Councillor Ferguson seconds that. Any questions on the intersection studies? Seeing none, all in favor? That is passed. And we have motion for maintenance, for the maintenance activity report, April 2020 to October 2020, with the attached winter operations plan. Looking for a motion on that. Councillor Miller, Councillor Veen, assuming as recommended. Any questions? All in favor? That is passed. And is there any other business in infrastructure? development? Nothing? Mr. Cole, you're good? All right. Thank you, and we are on to public health services. We have 1, 2, 3 items to receive and file. Looking for a motion to receive all 3 at once. Warden Weber, Councillor Ferguson seconds that. Sorry, Lonnie, I did see you there. Any questions on the 3 reports? Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Through the chair to everyone, it's really not a question. I just wanted to make a comment on C. I'm really pleased that we had this letter from Anita Dubo in Simcoe Muskoka district. As you all know, I've been doing my best to work on the long-term care scenario for a long time now. And I really appreciate anybody else speaking up and sending their thoughts through. And following everything that's been happening on the news lately, we're not any further forward. So I really appreciate when other municipalities start writing the letters. We've all got to get together on this and make this happen. This commission has not moved an inch yet. So thank you very much to Anita Dubo.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from either of these reports? I have one from B, and that's in regarding asymptomatic surveillance testing for COVID-19. So just a question for staff: Are we messaging out anything similar to what is in this report here and these recommendations in regards to changing the province's mind on asymptomatic surveillance? So your microphone's off, Mr. Taylor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe Dr. Ronade is still on the call, and I don't know that we've done any specific advocacy around this piece, but I would ask him to maybe speak to that really quickly.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think in some ways the advocacy piece around this has already been done. It's received a bunch of traction, and I think that the 2 things have happened as a result of this. One is that the eligibility criteria for testing have been changed to sort of go closer to what we know the test can do and where it's of the most benefit. And also, I think so there are now ongoing discussions with the Ministry of Long-Term Care as well as the Ontario Health folks around sort of how often and under what circumstances should this sort of mass testing proceed in long-term care homes. And I think that in the very early days, we had been saying, wow, people are very worried about this. It's very, it's scary, and sometimes that test is reassuring to people. And so I think that was the impetus for originally going ahead with this idea of mass testing. Public health folks like me and others were saying, well, you have to think about the benefits of that and the harms as well as the costs of it. And so now that discussion is becoming more kind of valid as people have seen the amount of effort that goes into routine asymptomatic surveillance testing. Especially in the context of low prevalence of disease. So I would say that this letter is a part of it, but that work and those conversations have already been happening and they've received some traction.
Okay, so related to this, how close are we to those faster tests here? I apologize, I'm looking for the acronym quickly, but those 5 to 10 minute tests, that'll be more for screening purposes.
Yeah, not close, right? So I think that there are 2 key messages around that. One is that maybe 2 rapid tests have been approved by Health Canada at this point. But I think the analogy that I used with you all before was that, rapid tests are going to become the new toilet paper and the new hair dye. And you need to be we need to know that that's going to happen. So there's already a tremendous backlog in terms of production of those tests. All of the tests that have been produced have already been, accounted for in terms of who's going to purchase them. The government of Canada has purchased them, and they're going to distribute them to different provinces in different areas based on specific, eligibility criteria or prioritization that I have not been a part part of. So, but I think in an earlier conversation we said that you would suspect that the place it would be the most useful and where it would go to first would be places where the need for testing and the lab facilities are far separated by geography, so that they had been maybe flying their test results over to somewhere else, and so the ability to detect in real time quickly in a fly-in community would be very different, right? And so probably those needs will be met first, and then there'll be a larger rollout plan for prioritization of where rapid tests could be used, recognizing that they're A, really expensive, B, in limited supply, right? So it'll be a while.
Thank you. Any further questions on these three reports? Councillor Napper.
Thank you, Mr. White. Just to follow up on Mrs. Bird's questions there, I know she's quite an advocate for the nursing homes there. Any of these concerns that you bring up here, are we experiencing them in our county homes?
Sorry, Lonnie, are you addressing me?
Yes, I was. I was just asking,
okay.
Any of these concerns that you bring up, is that province-wide, or is that just in Lambton County?
I think it's all over. Certainly from all the people that I've spoken to in Lambton County, yes, a lot of similar occurrences. And people who I've spoken to outside of our county, they all seem to be experiencing the same things, very similar things. And maybe each area's got one or two specific to them, but common denominators are the same throughout the province.
And just to follow up, do you have the courtesy to talk to the managers of those homes and pass that on to them to speed up the process?
I have spoken to some, yes, that's all in the works. And I've spoken to elected officials in those areas as well to see what programs they have and how they're dealing with things. So I've been trying to, what time I have in each 24/7, I've been trying to connect with as many of these people as possible so that we can compare notes.
Well, I'm in those homes on a daily basis almost, and my concerns are, I think they're doing a great job, but and it annoys me that like before they'll come on there and talk about nursing homes, and it's certainly not the same place my wife's in, I'll tell you that.
Well, I think the sad part, Lonnie, is that Premier Ford promised to have this commission rolling after the Canadian Armed Forces had been into the homes, and they made a long list of all the things that definitely have to be addressed. And we're still waiting. This is 9 months after they said this is a very serious situation, and still we're waiting. The commission are still having their lunches and meetings and everything else, and we've not seen anything definitive happen as a result of this commission. Now that's the sad part.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It is a well-written letter, so I appreciate that, and thanks for the conversation on that. Any further discussion on any of these three reports? Okay, I will look for a motion to receive, or I've already had the motion, sorry. All in favor? That is done. Any action on any of those reports? Okay. Okay, moving on to information reports. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 information reports and nothing requiring a motion. So I'll look for a motion to receive all 4 of those information reports, please. Councillor Napper, Councillor Veen seconds that. Any discussion? Councillor Bradley.
Yes, Chairman White. Item D on the ambulance base station on George Street. I just have a significant question there. Going up, putting a second story on, that's pretty different than what most municipalities are trying to do as it relates to accessibility and functionality. And I know it's a bit landlocked there. Was there any exploration of expanding the land? I know it's goes back to when it was transferred from the city to the county, but is there not room to have just a single floor operation? Because it's never functional to have 2 floors, especially in an emergency building.
Thank you. I had the same concern, Mr. Taylor.
Yes, through you, Councillor White. Thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. We are landlocked on that site. What we're finding now is, as described in the report, is that there certainly are operational issues with staffing, especially since some of the pressures with COVID and physical spacing for staff, especially during shift changes, etc. So you are right. When you move into a multi-level facility, there are other concerns, accessibility, etc., as you described. So what this report is really talking about is just trying to get some preliminary work done on the site so that we can start to assess and look at options for expansion. So it's just very early on, and we're not opposed to increasing the space if that's what we have to, but we just want an engineer to, tell us what the options are if the footing is stable enough to go into multi-level on the facility.
And Mr. Taylor, the options will include expansion as a single level building?
Absolutely. I think everything's being put on the table. We just know that the current footprint doesn't meet our operational requirements, so we just need to get a report back so that we can bring it back to County Council with options.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on these 4 reports? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That is passed. Any other business for public health? I see nothing. Great. Mr. Taylor, thank you to you and your staff.
Thank you.
Okay, on to cultural services. We have one item of correspondence to receive and file. Letter from Minister McLeod. Look for a motion to receive and file that. Councillor Miller or Councillor Bradley seconds. Any questions or discussion? Nothing. All in favor? That is done. Information reports. We have 3 of them. One on the Creative County Grant Program, one on Ontario Public Library Week 2020 report, and the Stage 3 reopening update for the Cultural Services Division. Looking for a motion to receive those 3 reports. Councillor Ferguson, Deputy Warden Marriott seconds that. Any questions or comments? Councillor Bradley. Your microphone, sir.
Item A, the Creative County Grant Program, pandemic response. Am I reading this correctly that basically if it's not COVID related, you're not eligible to apply like you would have been a year ago if you wanted to publish a book or do something that was creative in the county, that it has to be strictly related to COVID activities?
Mr. Meyer?
So through you, Mr. Chair, excellent question, Council Bradley. The committee decided that they would give priority to those cultural organizations that were facing unanticipated expenses associated with the pandemic response to maintain their audiences. However, depending on the applications received, that will not exclude, and certainly Chair White and some of the other members on the committee can elaborate, but the intention of the committee was that it would not exclude other applicants providing they meet the regular criteria, but preference would be given to those facing unanticipated costs related to safe reopening.
Yeah, Mr. Mark, can I make a point on that? Because I had referred, and we'll go into the detail, someone to make an application there as it relates to the publication of a book. And what they're running into, and it's a substantial book, and it's great merit, is that fundraising right now, if you want to say the cost of the book is $8,000, and I am asking the city to look at some sort of contribution, it's much tougher to fundraise right now. So you're getting double whammy. The gate that you normally would have went to, and I know you've sponsored a number of activities like that in the past, is also so much smaller gate now if you have to go out in the community and try to get commercial sponsorship or community sponsorship of any kind. So I hope the committee would keep that in mind. There's just a lot of less places you can go to in the business community and just in general to get sponsorships now on things like this. So, and I have to say, I was a little puzzled why the group would cut the funding. Seems to me this is the time that you want to invest in culture and keep the funding at a level it was in previous years. And I think that ship sailed, has it not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can respond to those two pieces. I guess with respect to the fundraising and the challenges, I would completely agree, and we've heard that from a number of the applicants from the past. You'll note that some of the parameters of the criteria are quite broad. So one of which would be expenses related to innovation in program delivery in response to the pandemic. And I think, I can't speak for the committee, but we would consider as staff, we would bring forward applications that showed innovation in their fundraising approach, given the circumstances of the pandemic as well. So I don't think it would preclude those who are facing challenges with fundraising. So, but that is a good point. And then the second part of the question, in terms of the funding reduction, at the time in June when this committee was looking at where do we go from here facing this pandemic and the financial constraints and the cost containment measures that the county, as all municipalities, were facing. And I think the consensus was it was prudent to show some reduction in terms of the grant allocation, but the committee was very adamant that it's still important to, as you say, support these groups, support safe reopening, support economic recovery through culture, and that's why 50% of the grant was maintained.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the answers.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. It was a great response to those questions, and I know the ward and I are both on that committee as well, and when that discussion came up in regards to potentially eliminating the grant entirely for this year, I know it was the warden that brought the motion forward. I know I spoke out, I think, initially on that, saying, now let's think about this long and hard. And in terms of the pandemic piece, I believe the real intent, and Mr. Meyer summed it up quite nicely, is the pandemic is more of a flavor for the year, and it's to assist despite constraints in regards to the pandemic. So those who are able to trudge through anyway and contribute and bring forward a solid business case would receive fair and probably priority consideration in that. Am I summing that up as well, fairly well, Warden?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I know at the time there was a push for the county to reduce their budget, not taking any cost-saving measures, and that was loud and clear from the city that the county wasn't doing what they should. So it was one thing that we could reduce to be doing a part of, I guess, a reduction, but certainly did not want to stop the program. A number of the grants that were to be given out for this year, we carried them over for events that could not happen this year. So that was a carryover, and we wanted to continue on with the program. So that was part of the rationale behind the 50% reduction. And I seen Councillor Napper had his hand up for you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Napper?
Thank you, White. Can I go back to ask Andrew a question? I read this report. What date is all the libraries going to be open rather than this pick up at the curb thing? I'm referring to Kamlaki. I didn't read anything in there that answered my question that I could tell the people out there that you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. So we don't have a reopening date in terms of reopening to normal library operations, and that's based on the guidelines and the restrictions that remain in place under stage 3 of the province's reopening plan. So we've prioritized curbside pickup, and unfortunately it can't be offered at every location. And to speak to your point about Kamlaki, we've prioritized it based on facilities that can accommodate curbside pickup with respect to parking spaces and our ability to stretch staff across the multiple locations. So we do not have a date for reopening all libraries under normal circumstances at this time. However, we do have, we are getting closer to a date to open the downtown Sarnia Library location as the city of Sarnia is wrapping up its renovation work there. We are just discussing with city representatives and the union a reactivation of that downtown site very soon. So we will be adding one additional location to our inventory for curbside pickup and limited public access. But unfortunately, we don't have a date just yet due to the restrictions that remain in place for returning to normal operations at all 25 locations.
Just to follow up, how many branches are involved like that? Or is Kamlaki the only one, or how many others you got?
Great, through you, Mr. Chair. We made an effort to ensure that we had at least one location in each municipality that was open for curbside pickup and limited public access. And I can share a list of those locations with council, but there is at least one in each municipality.
Thank you. You don't have to share me the list, just inquiring minds want to know.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions in regards to these three reports? Seeing none, all in favor of receiving? That is passed. Is there any other business for cultural services? Seeing nothing from committee members. Mr. Meyer, anything else to add?
Maybe just one brief note if I could share. About this time last year, we had shared with council the results of the community survey work regarding cultural services. And there was a commitment to come back to this group with a strategic plan for culture. As many of you recognize, we're at the end of the 10-year cultural plan framework. The cultural plan was approved by council in 2011, and we do have a commitment to renew that cultural plan. In February, the Ministry of Heritage, Tourism, Sport, and Culture Industries was set to release its new strategic plan, and with the pandemic, that was delayed. We understand that Minister McLeod is set to make an announcement to the Economic Club in Toronto regarding that strategy for the ministry on October the 30th. And so what we will be looking to do is take direction from that plan, come back to this group with some recommendations regarding a future plan for culture for the county. Obviously, we want to align our strategic priorities with the ministry as one of our principal funding partners, and that will inform sort of the next steps of the plan. So I just wanted to kind of touch base and provide this body with an update as to where that sits and why that may be slightly delayed. We want to ensure that we're in alignment with the provincial strategy moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And thank you to all of the staff as well in preparation of these reports. And we are on to corporate services. We have two information reports. Nothing requiring a motion, but one in terms of the inaugural meeting, 2021-2022 term, and then one in terms of the online warden and deputy warden's election report, citing that we will be moving forward with an online vote. Looking for a motion to receive these two reports. Councillor Veen, Warden Weber seconds that. Any discussion? Warden Weber?
Just a question, I guess, on the striking committee. Will we have the capabilities to put those members into a chat room separate while things are going on? I know some of the events that I've been at, the dinners and that, they'll put half a dozen people into a different chat room that they chat amongst themselves. The other 6 or 8 people will go into a different chat room. So each of the quadrants, will they be able to converse with themselves and come up with something to bring back to the total group? Is that how that's going to work?
So yes, that's correct. There's the ability to create rooms within the Zoom meeting, and that's the intent to move forward with that type of process. The hope as well in communicating what we've communicated in these reports today is that council of its own initiative starts thinking about these things so that each quadrant can perhaps, prior to December 2nd, perhaps nominate their individual to sit on the striking committee and move forward. So again, the intent of the reports was to hopefully get council to start thinking about these things, start looking at who's going to represent whom, and we can move forward on that basis. But if we need, and we will need to create separate discussion rooms within the Zoom meeting, there's definitely that ability, and that will be done.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, you had a question?
Well, I have a similar question to the wardens actually, but I also have a comment that I really do not like this method of handling the election for warden. I guess I didn't realize when I voted to not have these meetings in person that I was voting not to have the warden election in person as well. I think they grew at the fairground, but I guess that's water under the bridge now. Just a comment, I do not like this at all.
Thank you. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure it was totally clear initially, but I believe through the discussion it was raised that this would be the outcome of that vote. Am I clear on that, Mr. Tifo? I think it was by the time we actually passed that motion, it was explained.
Yeah, that's correct. That was the consequences of the discussion, the debate, and of course the ultimate vote, and also the impetus for the report itself, so that it's clearly communicated to council how the warden's election and deputy warden's election and that inaugural meeting on December 2nd will proceed, and that we can accommodate it on Zoom. Thank you.
But similarly, Councillor Miller, I would have preferred it in person as well for that one meeting, but this is the way it is. Warden Weaver?
I guess comment on that, and going back to that meeting, and in hindsight, probably some procedures were not properly followed, and I'll take responsibility for that. There was a motion that was an amendment to a motion that was put in place that changed the intent of the motion, so probably should not have been allowed, and as well as the tabling motion till the middle of December. Probably should have been a reconsideration because it was lifted off the table earlier. So procedure-wise, maybe didn't follow it as good as I could have or should have, but the result was that this is set, and we're going ahead with Zoom elections.
Thank you for that comment, Warden. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments in regards to these two reports? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is passed. Okay, we have no in-camera reports. And so with that, I will move to adjourn. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Bean seconds that. All in favor? Unanimous. Shocking. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. We'll see you at County Council in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Have a good day.